following is a video presentation via Zoom of the Civil War Roundtable of the District of Columbia. Founded in 1951, the Roundtable hosts monthly presentations at a location near Washington, D.C., more recently at the Fort Myer Officers Club. For more information, go to www.CWRTDC.org.
Gary Carlberg is an active member of the Civil War Impressionist Association, and he regularly portrays General Meade at reenactments and other events held throughout the country. And if you want any more information, you can go to his website, which is on our website, and I'm sure he's going to tell you more about that as part of his presentation. And like Gary intimated, this is not going to be your standard slideshow or even interview type thing. So it's going to be something a little bit different. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Gary Carlberg.
My pleasure to be here. It's interesting where all the things we've done with the Civil War, one of the characters that I find most interesting is this controversial guy, General George Meade. And it was my pleasure when I was asked to do reenactments of General Meade. And so we're going to take a look at this. And what I find interesting is as you research history, I found it interesting where you've got one author of a book that says one thing, and you get to the same scenario, and a different author has a whole different perspective. And so I've found that that's kind of what some of their history is people are taking different spins of limited information and trying to interpret it. So I'm actually going to give you a couple different perspectives of General Meade, because there are really, one of them is they're saying he's a Union fighting hero, one of, like Rodney Dangerfield, he's our, underrated Union hero. Or you could say he was an abusive, incompetent commanding general. And so we'll take a look at this. I'm like we've talked about, this is going to be a little different than the traditional presentation. Of course, a lot of the authors and presenters to this august group really know their history, and they're either teach at the college level or they write a book on it. And so I'm one of you guys. I'm more of a reenactor that really digs into the history of it. But this has been a little stretch for me, because normally I learn the history of one battle and not try to tell the whole history of an individual. So I've actually had some fun learning about these things. And I thank the groups. We got a lot of my friends on. And so like Jim Stannard that does Sheridan, I may pull from the group and ask for some help from these guys that have more technical details and stuff. We've got President Lincoln on also with us, and several others. So let's get going. I do want to point out that in my presentation, I wear a slouch hat when I'm doing Meade. My wife appreciates that I'm not trying to go Meade completely, even though I will dye my beard, which she doesn't appreciate, but I don't go for the bald head look. And so, there's a point you just need to stop and take it the way it is and go. And so I keep my hat on. But anyway, we'll get into this goggle-eyed snapping turtle and a little bit about what he did or didn't do and the controversy with him. I belong to the Civil War Impressionist Association, and we do reenactments really on the Eastern Theater. I moved to Minnesota, so I won't be able to do as many. But as you can see in that front row, we've got President Lincoln, the Secretary of War Stanton, Grant, myself, Sheridan, and General Stone, and then we've got several other additional characters in the background that play historical parts as aide-de-camps and other things. And so, and to be honest, one of the things I find great about this group is our focus on the history and learning about the battle and being able to reenact and do vignettes on the battle that we're at. And so we do, and based on our success, we're one of the few groups of generals that the National Park Service will let go onto a national park to do general officers, because let's face it, there's others that don't focus on the history quite as much. And so we had the distinct honor of being invited to be the first group of generals to the Military Through the Ages event, which is an invite-only specialty, and that was canceled due to COVID, but it was quite the compliment and things. So one of the things why I like reenacting is you can learn from reading a history book, watching a movie, or touring a battlefield. But to me, what really added to the learning experience is when I actually read the book, slept in a dog tent, marched with brogan shoes, wore wool in the summer, fired the black powder, and ate hardtack. And these experiential learning opportunities, it really brought me to a new level. In my studies that I did for a short while toward working towards a PhD in adult education, I learned one of the best ways for an adult to retain info is through experiential learning, in your 5 senses, not only your sight, but you hear, you taste, you see the smoke, and you touch the wool or the musket. And so it's a great way to really, for students of all ages, to really learn about our Civil War and what went on there. A couple other things that I found quite interesting. This one, my friend Ian took, and he called this the money shot. Can you imagine not only being on a battlefield and watching them shoot the cannons, and back that up one, but if you take a look at the money shot here, he captured the timing on this. You look at the back end of the 2 tubes, he captured it at the split second where they're both firing. So you got flames, the plumes coming out of the back. So that's what they call the money shot. This other one is Civil War hot air balloons. Holy cow. Have you ever seen one? You can read about it, but when you actually go there, see it, what a way to actually learn better about our history. Now, because of this august group, I have gone and done a lot of work with references to make sure that what I talk about is historically accurate and we can learn from it. And so good on that. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, this briefing style is more like what we do with Department of Defense with the generals. And so I'm not going to be reading the slides to you. I will be talking about a couple key points, but really because the mind can gather data quicker than someone can talk, by me talking about the 2 or 3 main points, then you as the reader observe the rest, and we can continue on. Now, because George Meade is talked about so much by so many people, so much better than me, what I'm going to cover on Gettysburg is like just a few seconds. All right. So General George Meade, what is his background? From Pennsylvania, actually born in Madrid, Spain, but he graduated 19th in his class as a civil engineer. Now that is a critical part that we will trace throughout his career, because you will see his ability to use terrain for a military advantage is something that he does really well. Okay, he re-entered left the military, re-entered as a topographical engineer, doing maps. And after the Mexican-American War, he built lighthouses. Now, the interesting thing with the lighthouses is when the Civil War's over and they had a party for him to celebrate his success and stuff, he was actually surprised that they never mentioned his contributions with lighthouses, because he thought that was more as very important also. Another common theme is, since he was from Pennsylvania, the governor then appointed him a command of a brigade in the Pennsylvania Reserve. And you will find that some of his closest comrades that he shares and some of the few that he doesn't snap at viciously are from his guys from Pennsylvania. Now, and so he gets in and he goes from being a captain to a 1-star general. That's a pretty good jump. And allegedly he's wounded seriously at the Battle of Glendale. It's one of the 7 days battle. Returned early to fight in the Manassas, and where he made a heroic stand. And really, they didn't save the Battle of Manassas, obviously, but what they talk about is McDowell received a message that intelligence as well as gallant officer Brigadier General Meade said if he could not only get reinforcements, not only could he hold the positions, but he could drive out the enemy. Meade shall have reinforcements, McDowell declared, and rushed in more men. The fighting lasted a lot until dark. They thought they'd gained victory, but then had orders to fall back. And so many historians give Meade credit for the retreat from the Second Manassas of not being a rout. Now, question, was he really badly wounded? Dr. Willen, what's a medical perspective on that, sir?
Well, first place I went to look was in the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion, and actually he is not mentioned in there, but I did find out that, of course, you mentioned that he was in the Peninsula Campaign. So in March of '62, he was placed under the command of McClellan's Army of the Potomac, and he did indeed serve in the 7 days battles. So we're talking about June 30th, 1862, the Battle of Glendale. He received multiple wounds in his arm, back, and side. A musket ball struck him above the right hip, clipped his liver, and just missed his spine as it passed through his body. Another bullet struck his arm, but the general stuck to his horse and he continued to direct his troops. It was only after a heavy loss of blood he was forced to leave the field. After recovering in Philadelphia, he joined his command in September. He participated in the Battle of Antietam of September 17th, 1862, and he was wounded in the thigh in that battle. He was able to return, however, to his command in time for the Battle of Fredericksburg on December 13th of 1862. If your question is, was he badly wounded at Glendale? The answer is absolutely he was. Bullet just missed his spine and he would have been paralyzed. The bullet did indeed hit his liver, and that kind of wound in the Civil War was often fatal. So he was quite lucky. Now, he went to Philadelphia to recover. My guess would be, well, that's some of the best physicians in the country happened to be in Philadelphia at the time, including at Jefferson Medical College, which was indeed founded by George McClellan's father. So I would say that the answer to your question is, yeah, he was badly wounded at Glendale.
Thank you much. Thank you much. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the Peachtree incident. Meade during this incident, Meade posted a cavalryman to guard a peach tree, returned in time to see the cavalry soldier succumb to the temptation, and actually this soldier stole a peach from the tree the soldier was supposed to be guarding. Meade's temper flared, and of course he's snapping right away. "You mercenary villain," he reported. "I set you to guard the tree and in a speechless rage, he draws his sword and smacks the soldier at the terrified guard. But he hit the soldier with the flat of his sword. Now, this is not going to be the last time that Meade strikes one of his own soldiers with the sword. Now, the question is, Private, do you find yourself guilty? What's your defense?
Sir, I absolutely carried out my orders. I guarded the tree and not a soldier passing took a peach.
We'd like to try out the chat feature. Those that find this private guilty of disobeying orders, police say, disobeyed, or if the soldier was clean and followed the duties to the letter of the law as appropriate, and maybe sneaking a peach is okay, then not guilty. So let's go with guilty or not guilty. And Kurt, if you could do the math in a little bit here, we'll give them time to do the math, and then we'll find out what we have. So continuing on, and thank you, Private, for your service to in the battle. All right, now getting into the Battle of Maryland campaign, when Meade's brigade stormed the heights there, General Hooker, his corps commander, said, "Look at Meade. With troops like those led that way, I can win anything." Now Meade's leading his Pennsylvania Reserve unit, and so huge success at that brigade level. Now, later on in the Battle of Antietam, where the most people are injured, most casualties in any Civil War battle, Meade replaced the wounded Hooker, who was in charge, and was selected over other generals. This is a big issue in Civil War time because seniority of rank was huge. And so anybody who got passed over, this is a problem. And so you're going to see later on this problem comes up over again and again. And because, one of the challenges in the Union Army had was they didn't seem to have as good generals as the South had. And a lot of their generals in the North were political appointees by governors or by President Lincoln. And so not necessarily any input. And let's face it, the country hadn't been at war, so they didn't have people that had a lot of military experience. And so we're going to see more of this issue. We got another incident. Meade saw a private from his division walk by with a load of pillaged corn that he'd stolen from a farmer. And at this point to the war, the Union Army is really working hard not to steal from the local farmers because they don't want to turn people against them. Even when they go in the South, they try not to upset the private citizen. "What are you doing with that corn?" he demanded. He berated the soldier. Meade grew angry. He swore at him, and then once again, he struck the soldier a blow in the side of the head, knocking him down. Unabashed, the private, a big, strong guy, turned to Meade and said, "If it weren't for them shoulder straps of yarn, I'd give you the darndest thrashing you'd ever had in your life." Meade, now a little more calmed down, embarrassed about his actions, left in quiet. And another incident where Meade had ordered an attack with his with the corps, and one of the officers, he's division commander this time, one of the officers refused to move forward and actually pointed a pistol at Meade. And at this kind, Meade took his soldier and knocked him out, knocked him to the ground, and then the deputy commander, who was at this point probably more afraid of Meade than the Confederates, said, "Charge," and they took the hill. Now the question is, what hills they took? Well, this is actually in the Battle of Fredericksburg, where the Meade and his hard-driving Pennsylvanians, they actually had the only breakthrough of the Confederate lines. And so one of the questions is, did Meade do what it needed to take to win, to fight and win, or is he being extreme? And so not a question for now, but this is part of the discussion I'm looking forward to as we go further in. So a little bit more about this Battle of Fredericksburg. Like I said, Meade's division is the only one to make the breakthrough through the famous Lieutenant General Stonewall Jackson's corps, and this is at the south end of the battlefield, not at St. Mary's Heights that you hear more about. Meade's men pushed through the swampy wooded area and surprised the South Carolinians, and the Union attack began to disintegrate and the Confederates counterattacked. Meade goes looking for support. He goes to General Gibbon, who was late in the attack, because he was, the artillery fire at him and his troops finally pulls up. And so Meade kind of had to shake him up. He had to go down, ride down, and get Meade Gibbon to move it forward. But then the problem is this General Birney, who belonged to Franklin's division, but he was sent to provide support. So when General Birney heard Meade's request for support, he replied he couldn't move forward till he'd received word from his commanding General Reynolds. Well, as you could well imagine, Meade is furious. And so second request, and so Meade physically went down and eye to eye with General Birney and said, "General, I assume the authority of ordering you to support, to provide support to me." And another person's visitor or observer there, witness, said Meade's language and gruffness was so violent and so bad it almost made the stones creep. Now, General Birney, tell me about your situation. You've been ordered to attack by someone you didn't work for. What's your defense, General?
I'm going to take that hill.
All right.
And order my men forward.
And so General Birney charges, and unfortunately, the Union did not win that battle, but they were there, and General Meade did get the support. A little bit of delay, and of course, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. If General Birney would have provided support earlier, would they have won the battle? That's one of those things that you could play dice with and argue all day long.
I do have the numbers now.
All right, Kurt, guilty or not guilty?
Well, I will tell you that there might have to be a recount. It looks as though not guilty has won 11 to about 7.
All right.
And the best quote from Paul Mazuka is not guilty. As T.S. Eliot wrote, "Do I dare eat a peach?"
All right,
You got
interesting.
the mail-in ballots.
May have to get the Supreme Court involved in this electoral vote. All right. Now, we see here in this slide talks about Meade and some of his battles and Battle of Corps, and in the second bullet, we're in the Battle of Chancellorsville, is where Meade is got a commander of a corps, and if you notice, it says displaced Major Butterfield. Whoa, wait a minute. If you take a look at during Gettysburg, Major General Butterfield is the chief of staff that Meade doesn't get along with. And so remember I talked about general seniority? General Butterfield had been selected as to been the corps commander, and then Meade points out to that, no, I have seniority. And so they replaced Butterfield with Meade. So Butterfield has a serious grudge and was insulted by what Meade did to him. And so you're going to see that coming in later on as things happen. All right. So, and the bit with, Meade wanted to attack, and Hooker, who used to be known as the fighting general, and the dude was awesome as a corps commander in fighting. But when he became the commander of the Army of the Potomac, he started having these McClellan-like moments and asking for reinforcements, and things weren't going good. So I want to talk a little bit about Meade's perspective on McClellan, because McClellan was from Pennsylvania, and actually was one of the guys that said, "I want Meade as a general in my command." And so Meade had a connection with him. And Meade was envious of McClellan's ability to rally the troops and ride in a parade and look good and organize things. And Meade was very impressed with him there. But he said on the battlefield, in particular, one of the battlefields, McClellan spent most of the time at the Pry House, a handsome brick building about 2 miles away from the battlefield, where they could make no sense of the battlefield. and they would receive reports and as they sat in their rocking chairs around the fire and send messages out. Well, Meade didn't think much of that as a corps commander, and talk about how corps fought independently instead of synchronized and coordinated. And there was very little times that McClellan had used his reserve. And so as a combat leader, Meade found McClellan lacking. Now, when we talk about McClellan lacking, as we transition to Meade's warhorse, Old Baldy, I mean, you saw in one of the previous slides multiple times, Meade is either shot, has holes in his hat, and of course, Baldy is shot 5 times when he's riding him. And so Meade is known to be in the battle. Meade was calm as could be with artillery fire coming around him, and was able to make great decisions and go forward and see what needs to be done and make those adjustments. On the bottom right here, I'd like to point out what a general officer's from the Union side saddle kind of looked like. Obviously, a lot of different variations, but this one is a McClellan officer saddle. And the blue part underneath is not a horse saddle blanket that a lot of people think it is. It's called a shabrak, and actually bought that from Jim. And with the 2 stars on it, that means it's a 2-star general. Now, Grant had a shabrak, and as a 3-star, he's just left the 2-star on because, at least to my knowledge, it was always a 2-star. Now, the different style of shabrak is one that covers the saddle, gives you a little bit more padding. Later on, you'll see a shabrak in action. Okay, so Gettysburg, once again, I'm going to keep this short. It's considered the turning point of the war. One of the authors talks about how Meade moved hyper aggressively, and he actually provided support to, agreed with Meade, where after the war, he provided good support and tried to have a corps move, the 9th Corps move 55 miles in 2 days to try to cut Confederate General Lee off as he's leaving. And of course, that's the big controversy. The reason I want to talk about the Leicester House on Cemetery Ridge is, this is the little tiny building, and it looks bigger than it is at Gettysburg. And Meade and his staff are in this building during an artillery fire. One of the cannonballs actually broke through the door, and another one knocked one of those posts as Meade is standing right next to it. And so Meade and his staff then went behind it. So once again, out front, leading from the front and trying to find out what's going on and make those adjustments. One of the authors really found no appreciation for General Meade's and talked about General Meade as just, the subordinates were the ones that carried the fight. They won the war. He just happened to be there. Talked about Meade's behavior being just reactive. Talked about how he missed Pickett's charge. Well, Meade at that point had actually thought that the biggest concern was the enemy with the cavalry was coming up from the rear, with Stuart coming up from the rear and doing a raid on their vulnerable position. So he went with some of the heavy artillery to the rear to command that. So in case he needed to put that into action, he could. And so then he went forward to do his battlefield circulation, as we in the current military call it, and then found out that the Pickett's charge had won. And so this is the bit where, where does the author get this? And I could see different perspectives, and talking with another historian, the point that came up with this particular author that was so negative on Meade was an author that wrote a lot about Lincoln. Well, of course, Lincoln didn't think much of Meade. He's glad that he won the battle, but he really thought that once you've got Lee in the palm of your hand, just close your fist and destroy this menace to us. And so interesting there. Part of the cavalry, the Union cavalry, it's not as if they didn't do anything. They captured 300 wagons and 1,300 men. Now, 300 wagons, you have to understand strategically, one of the reasons that Lee came to Pennsylvania and towards Gettysburg was to get the supplies. So if you took 300 wagons and the supplies that are with them, that is significant. Another author, Kent Masterson Brown, in his book, Retreat from Gettysburg, talks about, did a masterful study allegedly of Lee's movements after the battle, and said that although he was being severely criticized in Washington and by some in the army for his failure to attack Lee at Williamsport, where Lee was trying to cross the river, there was nothing Meade could have done to prevent Lee from winning the race or on the defensive line or hold it. And so a little bit of the two different perspectives on the controversy of at Gettysburg. Now, let's take a look at what the president thought. Well, obviously, the Vicksburg and Gettysburg both one after another. That was huge. And the president was so excited he did kind of an impromptu speech, which I understand was not common. And he talked about, and he found it interesting that 80 years after the representatives of the United States formed and assembled and declared a self-evident truth that all men are created equal, at that point, 80 years later, is this battle to help validate that self-evident truth. And it was, and you can see in the Gettysburg Address, that theme is what continues to come forward. This other thing with Lincoln, of course, is Lincoln wrote this letter to Meade to thank him, but he's very grateful for the magnificent success. But I don't believe you appreciate, he goes on to say, the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within your easy grasp. All you had to do is close in connection with, as I said, and connect, closed in on him in connection with our other late successes would have ended the war. And this is the letter to Meade that he never sent that's so historically famous. Now, Meade was investigated for this, and in particular, the complaint was that he was going to try to withdraw from Pike Creek to Pike Creek, and so he swore, and you can see this. And what's interesting is subordinate corps commanders were some of the ones that supported him. Obviously, for those who aren't familiar with history, Dan Sickles and Butterfield are two of the main people complaining with this. And I'd like to point out that he would have been taught at West Point that when you're developing your battle plan, you need to have secondary positions for defense and a contingency for withdrawal should it be required. So having a withdrawal plan would be something a professional military leader should have. Now, I find it interesting also that Major General Slocum claimed to have this scrap of paper, but it never did show up. A matter of fact, instead of people finding the document that they alleged to, it appears that everything was destroyed after he died. So we'll never know. Now, as we take a look into Bristoe Station and Mine Run, this is after Gettysburg and before Grant comes on the scene. And so this is parts of the war where Lincoln really wants him to go after him, and historians and Lincoln and a lot of other people think Meade is really too just not aggressive enough. And so they do these maneuvering to try to get at each other's flank, which is so much better than doing a frontal charge up a hill and massacring your soldiers. But it wasn't going well in the White House. Now, Meade won a battle at Bristoe Station, and being from Minnesota and being in Minnesota right now, That was the last battle the 1st Minnesota fought before the 3 years was up and they went back. So that was interesting. But anyway, and then I found it interesting, and I wasn't aware of this before, that when Meade had proposed to flank Lee by crossing the Rappahannock, it was Lincoln that said not to. And all we could gather from comments from Meade was, one of Meade's main jobs was to protect the capital region so that Lee couldn't get him around and attack. And so the thought was maybe it would have left the capital region too exposed. Now, the mine run was another one that I learned more about, wasn't familiar with, but they had a plan to attack, but major rainfall, and Meade and his troops had moved out, but they got bogged down, ran behind time, and at a point in time, General Meade called off the attack, knowing that the surprise was over, that element surprise wasn't there, and he said, "This would be a major blunder." Meade thought he'd be fired by Lincoln for that, but thought it was still the right thing to do. All right, moving on to when General Grant arrives on station, and of course he co-locates with Meade, which is not how it's ever been done before. Now, and if you read what Meade says, and you read what Grant says, and you read what Grant's aide-de-camp Horace Porter says, got different perspectives here. And so really in his letter to his wife, General Meade talks about how Grant did the strategic aspects of all military. So he had the Navy, he had the Eastern Theater, which is mainly General Meade and the Army of the Potomac, and then he had General Butler, and then he also had the Western Theater. So he's trying to put it all together for the strategic aspects. And in really at this point, Meade is doing more of the operational with the Army of the Potomac, which is the largest Union army in the Civil War. But there was one case at Culpeper, or not Culpeper, but one of the battlefields where right away at Elwood, where Grant had bypassed Meade and went directly to the Corps commanders and caused major confusion. And afterwards, they had a come to Jesus meeting. Grant completely agreed that was inappropriate. And from there on, he worked really hard to work through Meade and not going directly to the commanders. And so some of these things improved, but let's face it, it was embarrassing to Meade. And to say it went well would be a stretch of the imagination. But then others thought it was actually the best of both worlds, because Meade knew the Eastern Theater, he knew the Corps commanders, he knew Lee, and he knew how to, and in a battle, he was awesome. But let's face it, I think kind of a summary at this point is he really wasn't that aggressive on the offense. And you got Grant, who, really was very aggressive. So it might have been the best of both. Now, of course, and the bit where Grant said, wherever Lee goes, you go also, both Meade said to his wife, I will support that completely. And Grant later on talked about how he did so well. It's interesting, I found it a little humorous that the battle standard that Meade adopted, you can see the picture of me with the with the eagle with the wreath around it. Grant found it that quite interesting, and he said, when Grant first saw this flag, he said, "What is this? Is Imperial Caesar around here somewhere?" So that was the battle standard. Okay, Battle of Wilderness, bloody stalemate. Not going to cover that because so many people cover that. Didn't go well. But to the surprise of the troops, then, instead of retreating like every other general had done when they were in a stalemate, or even some of the times when they win, what Grant did was he went sideways and south onto Richmond to continue the attack. And that's where Lee said, whoa, not a quote, but he said, this is a game changer. So there's this portrait of this event, and that we tried to do a reenactment of. And I'm, of course, Meade on your left. All right. The next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is on to Richmond. There's this tiff between Meade and Sheridan. And of course, you got Sheridan in your front left there coming in, and we got Sheridan online here with us today. So if I get stuck, or since Meade and Sheridan continue to have a tiff, he might have some smart comments for us. But anyway, Sheridan had been sent to Meade to come to the headquarters because things hadn't gone so well. And a very hostile dispute took place between these two generals, and a lot of cursing and swearing going on. And bottom line is the cavalry had been ordered through Meade. The cavalry had been from Grant to Meade had been ordered to go south of the Spotsylvania Courthouse and secure this road junction so the 5th Corps can come through. And as they're coming down, the cavalry goes to sleep at the junction and stops the 5th Corps from coming in. Now, you can just imagine the snapping turtle appreciating this. He rides down, sees what's going on, and tries to clear things up. And so he's going to have this meeting with Sheridan on these blunders, and lets him have it. Well, Sheridan is another type A high-strung leader, and of course doesn't put up with much, and so they have it out, and they have this argument where Sheridan basically says, you've countermanded my orders, this isn't working, and besides, if you let me, I could whip Stuart. And Meade kind of blows him off and goes to report to General Grant, who isn't that far away. And anyway, bottom line is Grant kind of ignores all the little bit of argument between the two and picks up on I can whip Stuart, and says, really? Sheridan usually knows what he's talking about. Let him go. Let him go. And so, Meade said, yes, sir. Give the orders. And actually on the May 12th, Sheridan and his troopers fought at the Battle of Yellow Tavern, where they mortally wounded Jeb Stuart, and the Confederate cavalry was never at that same level again. Now, this is a touched up photo of at the Massaponax Church as they're going. You can see Meade by the left hand of the pew holding a map. So once again, he understands maps, he understands terrain, and then you got Grant sitting with his back to the tree with the 3 stars. And here's more of the black and white that the photographer took. And this is another cleaned up, better one than a lot of times found. But you can see now Grant's looking over Meade's shoulder, and they're talking about where they're going, how they're doing, and looking at the map. So once again, Meade in map reading and understanding how to use terrain, big part of one of his strengths. Okay. When we take a look at some of the lighter battles at North Anna and Cold Harbor, Meade goes to attack the well dug in positions, and for once, Grant orders a flanking maneuver. Grant had started out not thinking flanking and maneuvering was the way to go, but realized I'm losing too many troops. I need to try to do like Meade suggested a while back and try to do the flanking. So that was a big part, a big change. And then we take a look at Cold Harbor, not one of Grant's or Meade's best attacks at all. Things had started, and General Hancock comes up and says, I shall wait your orders, but express the opinion that if this first dash in the assault fails, other attempts are not going to do better. I should be, and Meade forwards the comments on to Grant saying, I should be glad to have your view. So he's not being insubordinate, but he's pointing out the obvious here. Glad to have your views on the continuance of these attacks, as if unsuccessful. And in afterwards, Grant said, I will always regret that last assault on Cold Harbor was ever made. And so this is part of the time when Grant has become known as the butcher, because he just didn't give in when it wasn't the right time. Now, there's a lot of controversy. Once again, some people talk about, well, Meade was fired, and of course, Meade actually tried to resign 3 times. Once after Gettysburg, when the president was disappointed in him not crushing Lee, and this is a second time that, or a second time was when he was with Grant. And so, you know, there's a lot of people think, well, Meade was only the commander of the Army of Potomac for a while. Oh no, as you'll see later on, a long time. And so what's interesting here is even after Cold Harbor and some of these other attacks were maybe weren't the most successful, but General Grant talks about Meade and Sherman, and it's the large commands that he respected both Meade and Sherman for, because, you know, managing 100,000 troops, the logistics and getting the corps to coordinate and go things, this is not something that a young leader can do easily. And so based on that, then Meade was promoted. Meade and Sherman were both promoted to major generals in the regular army. And actually, even though Sherman's came through Congress first, when Meade's orders were printed, it was backdated, so he had time and grade over Sherman because he had won Gettysburg. Now, this once again is a big deal during the Civil War. Now, another controversial situation. Oh boy, Meade, the snapping turtle, is going to lose it again. We have a situation here where at Cold Harbor that one of the newspaper reporters, a correspondent they called at the time, had embellished what he put in the paper and talked poorly of Meade. And so bottom line is Meade finds who the author is, Edwin Cropsey, and sent for him and had him explain and you know, explain how he wrote this. I asked his authority, and he says there's the talk of the camp. And I told him it was base and wicked lie, that I had made example of him, which had served the others from committing such offenses, and give publicity to his lie and the truth. And he gave an order denouncing the falsehood and ordered the offender, to actually be put on ridden around paraded through the lines of the army with a placard bearing on the inscription, libeler of the press, which means you're too liberal with what you say. And of course, as he's being ridden through the camp, you got soldiers throwing rotten fruit at him. So it was very embarrassing. Now, you know, the army thought that this was just great fun, hilarious. But the bottom line is this backfired as Meade gets into the face of Cropsey and really lets him have it. The bottom line is the whole press corps, from all the different correspondents, from then on, anything that was a problem was Meade's fault, and any success was given to Grant's credit. And so, you know, the lesson to today's military is, like it or not, you've got to work with the press. Okay, going on to the attack on Petersburg and Battle of the Crater. Grant's plan to cross the James River with a 2,000 foot pontoon bridge was one of the engineering feats of the war that did surprise Lee. Lee didn't see it coming, and then they snuck through, and they were leading the attack to Petersburg. Now, it's interesting, once again, with this controversy, there are some authors and historians, people that said, Meade was just not aggressive enough. But then when you take a look, another fact that I found was Hancock, one of Meade's corps commanders, and Meade were not told to attack Petersburg. The only one who was told to attack Petersburg, I believe, was General Smith with a corps. Those other guys were supposed to cross and go into encampment. And so, it would help if you knew what the plan was. Then you could go into it because I think we've seen in the past where, when Meade does get engaged, he is really all over the place and doing a great job as a commander in combat. But anyway, and Horace Porter, who is Lieutenant Colonel, was Grant's aide de camp, talks about Meade led the attacks at Petersburg, this initial one. He showed himself in the personification of the earnest, vigorous action and rousing insubordinate commanders to superior exertions, he said. His temper flared on occasion, but Porter felt it helped spur on his subordinates. Okay, is that good or bad? But anyway, he had much to try him about on this occasion, so and it was severe in his reprimands, and it showed his faults of temper, but he certainly displayed no major faults as a commander leading troops in combat. So interesting, where different perspectives on that attack at the initial attack on Petersburg. And at this time, then there was a discussion between Grant and the President and Secretary of War on, hey, we need to have a middle division commander and take, we got this problems in the Valley of the Shenandoah, and we need to clear out the Confederates there. So they're too close to the national capital region and they're getting logistics there. And so there was discussion on, and so Grant had this conversation with Meade and actually talked about him being an independent commander, which Meade was very interested in because this bit being under Grant's thumb was getting to be old and a little bit embarrassing, to say the least. Now, as we all know, it was Sheridan that was chosen to be that commander and did a phenomenal job there and was recognized for that. But Meade was extremely disappointed when he didn't get that, and so we continue on. Now, I'm not going to cover a lot about the the crater, other than to say that to me, this is kind of like Gettysburg. It's a huge one. You could, and I led two our military staff rides, as we call them, one to Gettysburg and the other one the crater. There is so much you can learn and do from there. And Kurt and John, I'd be interested, maybe if you're interested in re-looking, me coming back, and maybe we'll take a look at this one in more detail in another one of Civil War Roundtable events. But anyway, bottom line is the crater was an opportunity lost for multiple reasons. It seemed to me that the actual mine worked extremely well. We had the colored troops who had been, rising up in their capabilities, and they were trained and ready to go. And at the last minute, they were pulled from doing what they were trained. And you have a drunk leading the group that's going to charge. And I mean, how could it go wrong, right? Not trained, leaders drunk. Nobody knows what's going on. They didn't remove the effigies before they tried to attack. And so one of the greatest fiascos and lost opportunities in the battle. So I find this one to be interesting. And as long, guys, as I don't have to ride a horse because I got bucked off and broke a couple ribs, battled the crater. So as long as I don't have to ride a horse, I'd be interested in pursuing this further. All right. Now, after, Sheridan had some success at Five Forks. They talk about how Meade was very aggressive and Grant actually had to hold him back because it was a long time that they were in the siege, and finally they're breaking through. And so as they go on, then the 6th Corps attacks as then he's supporting the Sheridan, and everything is looking pretty good. They're moving on, and the huge part there, of course, was 6th Corps breaking through. And as they went forward, even though Meade was riding in an ambulance as he went forward, there were a lot of troops cheering him. And you'll see that basically for the rest of the Civil War during the Appomattox campaign to the end of the surrender, he's riding an ambulance. Now, the Battle of Sailors Creek, I found that interesting, where they actually the Confederate Marines were involved, a brigade of them, and Navy sailors involved in a ground attack. So that was interesting. And Sheridan embellished his success, just infuriating Meade. Now, Sheridan seemed to like the media, the public, and him embellishing was not a surprise to Grant and not a surprise to Meade. But anyway, Lieutenant Colonel Lyman, who is Meade's aide-de-camp, wrote a letter to the Boston Advertiser and pointed out it was actually Wright from the 6th Corps of Meade's group that who attacked, and he was under the immediate orders of General Meade, and nothing to do with this braggart, General Sheridan, whose entire command numbered not over 7,000 men, while the 2nd and 6th Corps had not less than 25,000 men involved in the fight. So while the media and sometimes the history says Sheridan's the man at this, there's another perspective on that. But then again, another point is when Wright went to submit his report to the Secretary of War, Grant had him send it through Sheridan. So maybe Sheridan really was in charge. Interesting. All right. Now, Custer did a attack and captured her supplies, and then the next day, Gordon's men under the Confederates attacked and about to break through until the 5th Corps and the 9th Corps stabilized the line. So good thing it wasn't just all Sheridan, as he would like us to believe. And so the Army of the Potomac and Meade's group were definitely involved. And when you take a look at it, he was not personally there during the surrender. There's one comment that said that Grant wanted one of the combatant commanders to be there in case there was some trickery from the Confederates. And so while other senior leaders were all involved in the surrender, he wanted Meade to be ready to deploy into combat again. But afterwards, he finds out at 5 o'clock about the surrender, gets on his horse instead of his ambulance and rides through through his corps, and they were just phenomenally excited. Now, the Grand Review. If you take a look at it, we've got Grant on the left, Vice President Johnson, kind of a blur here, and we've got Meade, and then Welles, and I don't know who he is, which one, and we got Sherman, and then Montgomery Meigs, I believe, is this guy in here. And Montgomery Meigs was the 2-star quartermaster general of the Union Army. And a closer look at this, so it focuses a little bit more, shows a little bit more. So these are some of the better photos I've seen of the Grand Review, and a picture Meade in those cases. And some of the people that once again had thought that Grant had or Meade had been relieved and what he did. Well, actually, after the war, he was given in charge of some of the reconstruction. So he had some of the larger groups to do and manage and lead as we tried to rebuild the South. Now, one perspective on Meade is pretty negative. And I'd like to point out, though, that really none of the historians or people of the time had much criticism as Meade as a brigadier general, division commander, corps commander, but it's more as the commander of the Army of the Potomac. They didn't find him as aggressive as they would have liked him to be. And so you've got, not being aggressiveness, reluctant attack, and then once again, we've got the one author that talks about he was reactive, missed things, and failed miserably to take Lee as Lee was retreating from. Now, the snapping turtle. The snapping turtle comments. I want to point something out, and what I have in my hand here now is an NCO sword, and this is actually an original one that I was able to buy. So this is kind of cool. One of my only original pieces I have. But if you notice, it's flat, not like the officer's sword or the saber that the cavalry have. And that the bottom line is the NCOs were behind the troops. And the NCOs, when you're attacking or lining up, they use the swords to keep people in line. And if you were going to go AWOL or try to run away from the battle, the swords were used to physically beat the soldiers into line. And so, this is Civil War. And the historical examples of executing deserters or beating your soldiers, hitting them with the swords was not completely out of character or unacceptable, although you gotta wonder about hitting someone on the head with a sword. But anyway, I wanted to point that out. So because in the 21st century, for us to, as an officer, to swear at a soldier now is not acceptable, let alone put a finger on him. So, the culture has changed. Now, a different perspective is that maybe as we take a look at these things more, maybe it's not as bad as we thought. Obviously, his short temper, his controversies with Dan Sickles and after Gettysburg, and the frustrating the president is frustrated as we're not attacking, and of course what he did with the press didn't do him well. And of course, the other thing is he was not politically astute. He thought that a good military man should be able to lead and get respect for that. And so, he didn't need to have to be political. And I think that was a huge part of his downfall to not get more credit. Well, and so there's others that think better of him than he would. And if you take a look at comments from General Lee, the Confederate commander, he said, the Yankee with the greatest ability was Meade, and he feared Meade more than any other man he'd met on the field of battle. And then going on with another one, another General Hill, another Confederate, said Meade was one of our most dreaded foes. He was always in deadly earnest, and he eschewed all trifling. Yeah, I don't think anybody argued with Meade, that snap and turtle. And then let's listen to what General Grant had to say in his memoirs. General Meade was an officer of great merit, with drawbacks to his usefulness that were beyond his control. He had been an officer in the Engineer Corps before the war, and consequently never served with troops till he was 46 years of age and never had a command less than a brigade. He clearly and distinctly saw the position of the enemy and the topography of the country in front of his position. His first idea was to take advantage of the lay of the ground sometimes without reference to the direction he wanted to move afterwards. Oops. He was subordinate to his superiors in rank to the extent that if he could execute an order which changed his own plans without the same deal, he would have displayed if the plan had been his own. That's good. He was brave and conscientious and commanded the respects of all who knew him. He had an unfortunate temper that would get them beyond his control at times and make him speak to officers of high rank in the most offensive manner. No one saw more fault more plainly of this than himself, and no one regretted it more. This made it unpleasant at times, even in battle, for those around him to approach him with even this information. In spite of this defect, he was a most valuable officer and deserves a high praise in the annals of this country. So, in our discussion, and this is the Meade Monument, was Meade an incompetent, abusive general, or was he a Union hero? And I'm going to stop sharing so we can go to the Hollywood squares, and I'd like to hear any perspectives that I've missed, and let's have that discussion that we're so good about doing.
All right. To try to keep this coordinated, maybe if you could include some questions in your chat, but in the meantime, also vote whether you think he's one or the other. That would be great, or something in between. Paul Severance, Dr. Severance had a number of comments to make. Paul, if you could unmute yourself, do you have any additional questions or comments that you would like to make? Because it sounds like the chat room was also on both sides of the argument too.
No, I was just throwing in some color comments, to add to the excellent presentation. It's always amazed me in terms of Meade that after Gettysburg, if you look at in some detail at the condition of the Army of the Potomac, he's lost 3 corps commanders, Reynolds, Sickles, Hancock are down, a bunch of division and brigade commanders. 320 of 362 artillery pieces are damaged or out of ammunition or missing horses. And he owns the battlefield, which includes all the wounded for both sides. And it always sticks in my mind, that Meade was trying to balance the strategic guidance of, look, stay between Lee and Washington, and if you can bring him the battle, bring him the battle. And then the responsibilities of the post-battle, which were immense at Gettysburg. And, I've always thought that, here's a guy that's been in command 6 days and he beat Bobby Lee. Yeah, okay. So he refers to driving the invaders from his country, but I thought he did a pretty good job, and I thought he did well, even under the odd command relationship with General Meade. So I guess I'd have to come down on the side of an American hero. Toxic leadership is nothing new. It permeates the US military today. But the question on people with bad tempers and abusive behavior is they get the job done. And so they are appealing to those that want to get the job done. And it's just the nature, I think, of the military instrument that leadership somewhat takes that form. That's all.
Tom Bolts, do you want to chime in? You had some good comments. If you'd like to unmute yourself and then add to those.
Yeah, there's a lot more to being a successful field army commander than just being a successful tactician. And how do you rate Meade as a logistician, personnel administrator, disciplinarian, trainer, and all those things that need that go into being a successful commander? You don't get a lot of notice, but yet you really have to do them and do them well to have a successful field army. And there are things that are done prior to the battle. So how do you rate Meade along those lines?
I think Grant said it best when he said Meade and Sherman were able to lead large armies better than anyone else he's ever seen. Now, one of the things that of success later on was his chief of staff, Humphreys, was an excellent guy with attention to detail also. And so I think the two of them together really did that. But, like you're saying, to be a good leader, there's the logistics. You need to know the sequence of command. How do you feed, thousands of men and get the ammunition to them at the right time at the right place? How do you get the sequence of units? And how do you, with the limited maps of the time, how do you plan that? So there's a lot that goes in. And I'd also like to point out that, from today's Army, what I've seen is the guys that do really well in administrative garrison type sometimes fall apart completely in the field of battle when you're getting shot at.
So far, we have an overwhelming hero vote, although there are some adjectives in there, but keep on voting. And John Anderson, you had some good points to make too. If you could unmute yourself and if you want to expand on those, that'd be great.
I just wanted to say that I think Grant did not suffer fools and clearly saw the operational genius in Meade. And I just posted something here. Grant had been a quartermaster himself in the Mexican War, but I think Grant had the appreciation for logistics for sure. And then when Grant came in to take over the AOP, he was not foolish enough, given the track record that had been there and all the turnover. And here he is a newbie, basically, even though he is U.S. Grant. He had the brains to keep Meade in place. And so I think he would not have kept him along if he didn't see the merit in the man. And I think the war owes Meade a lot of gratitude.
Thank you, John. Oops, did we? No, we did not lose Bryce Team Springfield, although it would be good to know your name. You had some comments too. If you want to unmute yourself and expand on those.
I think Meade was a Union hero in his shortcomings, as I said. And I think Gary did an excellent job describing some of those shortcomings, his temper particularly, but we're all flawed individuals. So he did the best with what he had. And I think Lincoln appreciated that, which is why Lincoln rescinded the letter that he wrote. Lincoln was rather scathing in that letter, demanding why did you not pursue, Lee when you had the chance? You had him in the palm of your hand and you let him escape, much like McClellan did earlier. And Lincoln was very upset by that, but he realized that Meade did the best he could with what he had. So even Lincoln knew when to back down.
Actually never sent the letter to him too.
No, that's correct. He didn't, but he was going to.
Right. That was one of Lincoln's characteristics. He considered by putting the letter away and said, do I still want to do this? That's why you have to admire Lincoln so much.
If you continue to vote, but it's overwhelmingly positive for Meade. Terry Zerwig, you had a question about the Battle at Manassas Gap.
So Gary, the Battle of Manassas Gap, which took place in say July, something like that, maybe the 22nd of July, something like that. And Meade found himself at Manassas Gap with General French with 20,000 soldiers. And all they had to do was punch through the gap and attack Lee's retreating columns. And it could have created a devastating effect on the Army of Northern Virginia. And I think there was a rear guard action performed by, I forget which general, but anyway, that held them off. But they missed a golden opportunity to really wreak havoc on the retreating army of the Northern Virginia. So just could you comment about that?
I really didn't go, I've never done that, that part of it, so I don't have a lot of more details, and I think you did a pretty good summary, but, you know, sometimes, you know, as we saw, Meade was really good at following orders of superiors. Now, his aide-de-camp talked about how Meade would get in their face and the old snapping turtle would let people have it. And he actually enjoyed having people stay uncomfortable and being supportive. But you could see, and never did Meade ever say anything negative to his commander or treat his commander or the president of the United States inappropriately. So when he was given the order to not pursue, that would be very typical of Meade to follow the letter to the law.
Paul, can I go back to Dr. Severance? You had some insight into the problems that Meade had with respect to the press.
Yeah, I was just referring to the fact that Samuel Wilkerson, you know, was accredited. You know, most people don't understand that we had accredited correspondents in the Civil War. They think that started with Desert Storm. That's not true. But he was accredited. He was the bureau chief in Washington for the New York Times. And his son, Bayard Wilkerson, of course, was killed.
Died? Yeah.
Supporting Barlow out of Barlow's No. And Samuel Wilkerson directly blamed Meade and his decision, you know, to engage and how he engaged north of Gettysburg the first day for his son's death. And he said, I will never write another good word about Meade. And my understanding was that after the incident that Gary described, and I don't know if this is true, maybe he wants to talk about it, that the correspondents kind of got together in sort of a collusion and said, yeah, we're with you. We're not going to write another positive word about Meade for the rest of the war. And so some of the accomplishments and achievements that Meade indeed, you know, accomplished during the Overland campaign and through the end of the war were deliberately withheld by the press corps, if you will, because of that incident where he, you know, pretty much humiliated the libeler, as he called it. Is that your understanding of that, Gary?
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting, after Lee's surrender, Meade, I think it had coffee or dinner with one of the correspondents, and they got to talk together and talked about it. And at that point, they agreed, we went overzealous, we blackmailed you when you shouldn't have. And they started doing more positive things about Meade. But let's face it, the damage had been done. Now, I can't argue with Sherman and Sheridan being great leaders also. And, you know, after the war was over, it's interesting that you know, Meade continued as the Army of the Potomac, as the district commander, and actually he continued to be on active duty until he died on November 6th at the age of 56 after dying of pneumonia. And so, you know, he was highly thought of Grant, who became president and kept him on board to help get things going and for the Reconstruction, which is a very important part of, you know, the war is only one phase of this. You've got to have the rebuilding afterwards, and the military is just the strong arm of politics. And so, you know, it all continued, but, you know, he really, and let's face it, Meade's temper and how he reacted and treated this, he caused his own demise here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a couple of comments about Meade. One is with Gettysburg. Where he was during Pickett's charge, of course, was at Powers Hill, and I think he was at the right place for the Army commander to be, not in the line of fire, basically. So I don't think that criticism was justified. other decision that was made was not to attack the Confederates at the Potomac. And that was, I think it was made by Sedgwick, the Sixth Corps, who was chasing them. And they made the right decision because Lee was really dug in there. I've been down there and we've gone through that, and they were really dug in down there. The one thing I would say where he probably screwed up was that he fell off the horse at the crater, but the decision to replace Ferraro's troops with Ledley's troops was not a smart move.
Yeah, and the bottom line with that was Meade, and it gets into politics. You got to remember the election is in process, and things are a little iffy. And actually, Grant and Meade got together and they decided, you know, if we have the colored troops major attack and they failed, this will be a political disaster for the President Lincoln in his re-election thing. So you could see how politics had a huge part in this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, but, and then Burnside was the one that selected the subordinate commander to replace him and drew it by straws, which didn't require anybody to do a recon. And it was, oh my God. I mean, I think the crater could have worked well.
Yeah, well, the black troops were trained for that, and they, you know, but they, of course, they ended up getting the bad part of it anyhow. Ledley was not even there. He was drinking with the surgeon, actually.
You know, I do want to get, I see Phil Sheridan is with us, as you pointed out, Gary. So I was wondering if we could get Phil Sheridan to make any comment on.
Knowing Phil, I think we should censor him out, though, Kurt. You know, go ahead.
That's right.
Jim Standard, do you want to make any comments about the claim that you embellished the reports on certain battles?
Well, in the beauty of somebody else's eye, what can I say? He was technically my boss at the time, so you have to kind of give him a little bit of leeway, if you will, and that sort of thing. But yeah, he did have his problems with the media. Sheridan wasn't so much. He more or less worked around with it, but he, again, they had different issues at the time. Sheridan always was, you know, leading from the front. He had a bit of issue with Meade, of course, going back to Spotsylvania, where Sheridan wanted to, you know, get the cavalry out to basically, you know, see what the cavalry could really do. Whereas Meade, with some other generals, are old school, where they were hosting or having the cavalry held back. One of the more important duties for the cavalry, as far as some of these leaders were, was guard duty, you know, picket duty, which was, you know, serious duty back in the day when you have the Army of the Potomac up to 120,000 strong. Picket duty, like that's 60 miles around that perimeter. So it was, you know, it was hard duty. And that was something that really chafed Sheridan and some of the, you know, more pro-cavalry people to finally get out and be able, you know, to do what they thought they could do best. But a lot of times there wasn't the support for the cavalry. But going on to Appomattox campaign, it was, in my studies anyway, you know, where Sheridan ran into a bit of an issue with Meade, is that Meade, again, being ill at the time, and giving him credit for that, being in an ambulance, Meade was fairly content just to follow Lee, to stay behind. And Sheridan wanted to cut him off. And that's where Sheridan had to go around Meade at that time and have a little one-on-one with Grant, and got the permission from Grant to basically go ahead and cut off Lee's retreat. So, you know, that was where, again, Sheridan would use that, you know, his initiative every once in a while to obviously give Meade a bit of a hard time over the decisions that were to be made out there. But again, that's out in the battlefield. Like, you know, the difference between being a hero and a heel is like that far. You get away with it, you're a hero. If you're not, you're a heel. But going on to accolades, I'll leave you with this one. In Grant's memoirs, he did give Sheridan the accolade of being the greatest general alive or dead. He has no peer. Just saying. I'll leave you with that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Your video is up. We can see
Yeah.
it. If you want to play that, that'd be perfect.
All right.
Hi.
This is the infamous tiff between Meade and Sheridan. I did a quick
What's
one
that?
on, but
I don't know if, are you talking?
No.
Can I hear you?
No, I can hear them right now.
Yeah, I heard it.
Now, this did take
No,
place.
he's just
at
showing a video.
the Mule Shoe at National Parks, Spotsylvania.
Oh, it said Spotsylvania, yeah.
General, you ride in here on a mule? I asked for you
No.
to be here hours ago. We've been on the road all night.
Here's
We
the
had your
situation.
orders.
Here
We
is
ended
the
up where you need
situation.
us.
Everything's working.
General Grant gave us specific orders, and I passed that on to the cavalry, that we were to take into the defeat in the wilderness. We were going to, the orders were to go south and east and secure the area and the roads to the south and east of the Spotsylvania courthouse. The movement was to be at night, and so I ordered the cav to go in front to clear the roads. And when I find out, the cavalry is blocking the 5th Corps from accomplishing that mission. When there's this problem identified, I ride down personally to see what the situation is, and I find at midnight the cavalry sleeping. What kind of crew taking a rest? What is this all
the
about?
original crew
I am
rest of
tired
the
of these
US Army
blunders.
We had orders, we hit the road, we were sitting there, and we were mounted in place, ready to go. My men were in their position where they needed to be at that time.
Oh, okay.
You and countermanded my orders with our
I got a hit
particular.
here.
And I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't have this dual issue. We have to work with one way.
Okay. Well,
Do this, and we were given the orders to be there, and we were there.
Be there and crew, resting the crew. The mission was to go like that.
I'll have to find out. Try it.
Open the roads for the
someone's got a hot mic.
We were there doing our screening. We were there doing the. Well, we run into the problem having to guard your trains all the time.
Well, what is the cavalry supposed to do?
What is it?
To guard the trains, to do the picketing,
Put your mouse over here again.
and do the reconnaissance.
And you're also on my issue about looking after Stewart. I can whip him if you let me. But if you're going to come in and take over the cavalry at your whim, that's your prerogative. But if that's the case, I'm finished.
The Spotsylvania courthouse, and the problem was that the cab, although they followed my orders to go forward, when I went down to find out what the problem was, I found the cavalry sleeping at midnight, not moving forward as directed. When I confronted General Sheridan on this, he whined and sniveled and said something about he could whip Stewart if we let him. He said he could whip him, sir.
I say go ahead and let him do it.
Meade's not happy.
That's what you want, sir. That's what we'll do.
Can I go on to accelerate this a little bit to get the orders to have Sheridan pursue Stewart and logistics to support him?
General Butler, procuring supplies and return to this army. Your dismounted men will be left with the trains. Have them move out.
Lieutenant Colonel Horace Porter, aide-de-camp to General Grant, delivering the message to General Sheridan.
Finally. Hassan, thank you. General Meade, by your leave.
Carry on.
And you take a look at the horse he's wearing. It's got a shabrock.
Target.
Let's go with Stewart, boys! 5-2 to the left!
There we go. So thank you for that. Glad we had the time to be able to share that. Reenactors that work on the history I think we can add a lot and help you feel like you've actually been there, done that, to understand history better. Thank you.
Just real quick for Gary, you know, when you showed Meade's gravesite, of course, he was born in Cadiz, Spain, and you talk about the political dimensions of warfare and the politics of civil military relations. There's I think a fairly robust view that one of the reasons Meade was selected to replace Hooker was he was not a natural-born citizen of the United States. In other words, he wasn't born in the continent here, and that he could never run for president, and that Lincoln saw that he would not be the type of threat that McClellan was starting to become with the Democrats. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think that would be a very relevant thing because not only was McClellan, who was supposed to be in charge of the Union Army, a command general in chief for a while, you know, he ran against Lincoln on the grounds that we shouldn't be in this Civil War. So wait a minute. Now, if you take a look at within the Department of Defense now, we have laws that strictly prohibit militaries from getting involved in politics. And guys, that all leads back to the Civil War. And then also when Grant was being very successful, there was a huge move for him to become president of the United States. And so, you know, Lincoln really didn't need to have additional stress. He needed a combatant commander or commander of troops that, you know, helped execute the military arm of politics, not someone competing against him. So I thought that was an insightful comment. Very good, very good.